Hello. Today I'm going to be reviewing Megamind. So Megamind is a animated superhero film by Dreamworks that sort of subverts some of the tropes in a bit. And it follows the titular character Megamind. Megamind, as a baby, gets sent away because his planet is about to get destroyed. So basically Superman's origin story. However, he's not the only one who gets sent off. There's also this other person who is from another place and his planet is about to get destroyed as well. And that is Metro Man. Metro Man and Megamind both arrive on Earth as babies. Metro Man lands in this mansion, whereas Megamind lands in a prison. And so Megamind grows up in a prison. And also he's blue and no one likes him. Growing up, he's always villainized, whereas Metro Man is idolized. And we see this slowly turns from childish rivalry into a superhero, supervillain dynamic as we arrive at the proper beginning of the story, where both of them are now adults. And Megamind is a supervillain who tries to defeat Metro Man on numerous occasions and always fails, because the hero always wins and the villain always loses. And the story begins on a run-of-the-mill day with Megamind hatching a plot to kidnap Metro Man's supposed love interest, Roxanne, who is a reporter. The plan he has is that he's created a fake observatory that looks just like the real observatory. So he's positioned himself and Roxanne in this fake observatory. Roxanne is not very concerned about being kidnapped, knowing that Metro Man will figure out they're in the observatory and go there. Once he does that, the plan is to blow him up with this laser powered by the sun. But anyway, as the laser is getting ready to fire, you can see that Metro Man is trying to escape the observatory, but he's for some reason unable to. A very confused Megamind has asked him what's going on.
This dome is obviously lined with copper.
Yeah? So?
Sir, copper drains my powers.
Your weakness is copper? You're kidding, right?
So then the laser ends up firing, blowing up the observatory. They see what looks to be Metro Man flying towards them after the explosion. But when he lands, it's revealed he's nothing but a skeleton now, which seems to freak out and genuinely shock Megamind and everyone involved, none of whom can actually believe that he's done it, that he killed him.
You did it, sir. I did it? He did it.
I did it?
He did it.
This opening is really strong and really sets up the rest of the film. That is one. Megamind takes over the city and he has some fun for a while, doing some general hijinks, but he quickly gets pretty bored and sort of starts to realize that he doesn't have much of a purpose anymore, because without a superhero to fight, what's the point of him being a supervillain? He's a yin without a yang. So he starts to work towards making a new superhero, using Metro Man's dandruff to create a special concoction that will infuse Metro Man's powers into someone else. And they end up infusing powers into this guy named Hal Jordan. Quick little editor's note. His name's actually Hal Stewart. Hal Jordan is the name of Green Lantern. For some reason I got them confused, and throughout the rest of this review I'll be calling him Hal Jordan. So whenever I say Hal Jordan, just pretend I'm saying Hal Stewart. And I'll talk more about Hal Jordan later on. But while also working on this project of his, Megamind also starts to hang out with Roxanne in disguise as this guy named Bernard, because Roxanne is trying to sort of uncover what Megamind's plan is, and disguised as Bernard, Megamind sort of tries to help her out a bit while also steering her clear of discovering too much stuff. But they sort of start to bond quite a bit. They start dating. And this is very important because this is one of the first times that Megamind has been treated sort of as a person and not villainized. And it sort of starts to show that he does have a good side. So the thing is, although he's a self-proclaimed supervillain, he's not really that evil. His plots and plans are more outlandish and extravagant, and they're not like maliciously evil necessarily. It almost seems sort of like a game between him and Metro Man. Because of the way he's been treated, he sort of leans into this villain aspect. But with Roxanne, he doesn't have to be that person, at least when he's disguised as Bernard. Until one night they go on a date and kiss, but then his disguise gets turned off accidentally. After Roxanne realizes what's happened, she ends up breaking up with him, and it's handled really, really well. Because their breakup makes sense, because she still sees Megamind as a villain. In a sense, he sort of still sees himself as a villain as well. However, they do end up working together later on to stop the final villain. Eventually, they sort of reconnect a bit as they work together. Now, Hal Jordan is a character who's handled really well. He's just the worst, but in the right way. He's the cameraman who works with Roxanne. He's not a particularly impressive individual. Right off the bat, he's shown to be interested in Roxanne, but also he goes about asking her out in some weird and creepy ways. So he's a bit of a creep. For the first part of the story, he's not really that important of a character. He's not really considered much of a threat or anything. He's just a bit of a weirdo. But then he gets given Metro Man's powers, and then things sort of change. So Megamind ends up using a disguise to train Hal Jordan, who he gives the superhero name Titan. So he ends up training him to be a superhero, basically. Once his training is complete, Hal Jordan ends up visiting Roxanne now that he's got superhero powers. He tries to get her to go out with him, and let's just say he does not take the rejection very well. He acts all like entitled to be with her and all that, and throws her around the city a bit. Don't worry, she's not hurt or anything. He also sees her on a date with Bernard, and then is pretty disheartened by that. After Megamind and Roxanne break up, he decides to cheer himself up by having a good old fight of good versus evil against the new superhero. So he suits up, waits for Titan to come fight him, and he basically ends up waiting the entire day. So he gets sick of waiting, goes to visit Titan at his home, when we find out that Titan is not interested in fighting Megamind. He in fact wants to team up to be a supervillain duo, and he shows off that he's stolen a bunch of stuff, and he reveals that he only took the superhero gig to get Roxanne. Megamind is disgusted by his behavior and tries to remind him that he's meant to be a superhero. But when that doesn't work, he reveals that he was the one who trained him, and that he was also the one who was dating Roxanne. Really angers Titan, and they end up having that fight. So they have a pretty good fight, pretty good action scene. And when it's over, Megamind, he looks pretty happy, and he's like, okay, that was pretty good, alright, you can take me to jail now. But Titan doesn't want to take him to jail, he wants to kill Megamind. So Megamind has to try and escape. And he ends up implementing his fail-safe procedure, which summons this giant ball of copper to enclose Titan, since copper was Metro Man's weakness. But then Titan breaks through it as if it's nothing. But Megamind is able to escape. The mayor comes over to thank Titan for saving them.
Thank you! Titan has freed us!
Oh, I wouldn't say free. More like under new management.
Hal Jordan is a really good villain. He doesn't start as the villain, he becomes the villain as the story progresses. But he never really changes as a character. His personality and behaviour once he has powers is consistent with him before he has powers. It's just that now he actually has powers. He has the means to do terrible things in a way that he couldn't really do before. And he's just an entitled creep who gets given powers, and then because he's so selfish, he doesn't use his powers for good or anything. He just uses it for self-gain. And when he's wronged, he tries to kill people. Specifically, he tries to kill Megamind, and then he also ends up kidnapping Roxanne later on to try and draw Megamind out. So he's a pretty good villain, which shows the downsides of giving superpowers to random individuals. Because not everyone has a good heart. Not everyone is a Clark Kent or a Peter Parker. He also serves the purpose of giving Megamind something good and heroic to do, which allows him to slowly claw his way out of the villain role and into the superhero role. Another character that's really good, Metro Man. After the copper proves ineffective on Titan, Megamind and Roxanne go to visit Metro Man's old home for clues and answers, and they end up discovering that he is in fact still alive there. So he reveals this whole big story, explains what had happened, which basically comes down to him deciding that he didn't want to be a superhero anymore. It's not what he wanted to do. He did it because he had powers and he felt sort of like he had to. He had these powers, so he had to help. He had great power, so he had great responsibility. But it's not really what he was passionate about. So he decides to retire from that. And he realized that the only way he could get out of that job was to die or to fake his death. So that's what he did. So now he pursues his passion of music, and he's now called Music Man. That way he can keep his logo. But he has a heart-to-heart with Megamind and encourages him to step up and do the right thing now. It's an interesting little plot point, and it makes you wonder if you were given superpowers, would you want to be a superhero? Would you want to give up your normal life and your normal goals to protect the city that you're in or whatever? It's an interesting question, and the movie doesn't really pick a side either. So it's left to the viewer, to figure out how you feel about that. Maybe Metro Man's being selfish and he should be a superhero for as long as he can for the greater good. But, I mean, he is an individual and he also has his own goals and dreams and his own life. And is it really fair to ask him to give all that up for everyone else? I don't know. It's an interesting little moral question. A few other minor points. The humour in this movie is pretty good. There's a lot of that good hero-villain banter that comes from superhero stories. And the music is also pretty good. There's a lot of good music in here. Back in Black, Highway to Hell, Welcome to the Jungle. And there's a few good songs in here, and they fit pretty well with the story and what's going on. Also, really small detail. The story takes place in Metro City, but Megamind calls it Metrocity, which is a pretty clever little detail. However, it also becomes incredibly important to the story. Towards the end of the film, Megamind uses a disguise to make himself look like Metro Man, and he scares Titan away, who is utterly terrified of Metro Man, apparently. It's looking like the day is saved, at least until Titan comes back, having clued in that it was Megamind in disguise, because he called it Metrocity instead of Metro City. Whoops. So yeah, overall it is a very good film. Has some very good characters and some very good themes, and sort of subverts some superhero tropes a bit in a good way. Megamind's whole arc is just really good, and his whole dynamic for Roxanne is really solid as well, and is a key integral part of his arc as well. Although Metro Man's not in the movie very much, he has a very important role. His death at the start of the film sort of represents the first key event that really begins the story by breaking the status quo that was assumed to have been there. Hal Jordan was a pretty well-crafted villain, and in all honesty, most of us probably know some people like Hal Jordan who, if given powers, would probably turn into a villain like Hal Jordan did. So it also serves as a bit of a warning. So yeah, I think he was crafted pretty well. And if I had to pick out any negatives, honestly I can't really think of much negative to say. There is a fake out death towards the end of the film, and personally I don't like fake out deaths. It's more of a personal preference than a real criticism. So yeah, I don't really have any negative things to say about it. I think it's a really good film, and it is in fact on my list of top 3 favourite films of all time. I highly recommend watching Megamind if you're able to, and if you haven't already. That's my thoughts on Megamind. I hope you found this review helpful and entertaining, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.